Bryan, thank you for doing this.
It's always fun to be back at Mercer.
And you're back here a lot.
I am. I really enjoyed my time here, so I'm happy to come back.
I see you in the building quite a bit. Let's start with just if you could talk to students a little bit about your background growing up and what led you eventually to choose to come to law school in general and Mercer in particular.
My background is I'm from Selma, Alabama. My family's generations of farmers, so it was definitely different to end up a lawyer. I ended up a lawyer just by sheer dumb luck, I'm going to tell you now.
Smart luck.
My aspiration originally was to be a contortionist in the circus.
Mine too.
But somewhere along the way, my grandmother put it in my head to be a lawyer because I'm also an arguer. And since I'm always right, there's really no point in arguing, but I keep going anyway. And she just happened to put in my head maybe I should be a lawyer. And thinking about this course and thinking about my path, there's actually articles in my hometown's newspaper, Slow News Days, where I was interviewed and asked about my prospects, and at some point, right around 6, and continuing from that point on, I said something about I wanted to be a lawyer. And it went away eventually, and by the time I was graduating from high school, I was going to be a chef. That was my new path. I was going to be a chef. Who needs college? I want to cook and be the next Wolfgang Puck. And just
they don't know who that is.
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right, good.
But I was really good at languages in high school, and one of my teachers just happened to say, well, you could teach language since you're really good in it, and you really would only have to go to college to learn that particular language that you want to teach. You don't have to do all the math and science that I thought you were supposed to go to college for. So I figured, since I like language, why not go to college? And luckily I stumbled on someone with Dr. Lanier at University of Central Florida. I don't know if anybody here is from UCF. You remember Dr. Lanier and his reputation, but he's one of the toughest teachers there. He teaches poli-sci, but he teaches it using the Socratic method so that you get that preliminary experience in law school. So after I took his classes and survived, I figured, maybe I need to circle back to this law thing. This seems really cool. And he actually recommended Mercer because he knew you, and he knew me and how I like to learn. I like one-on-ones. I like to really utilize the professor's time and get my money's worth. So he thought this place was really good for me, and he recommended it. And that's how I ended up here. So based on his recommendation, I said I wasn't going to be a lawyer unless I came to Mercer. And fortunately, y'all let me in. Many may regret it, but I got through.
Not for a minute. Tell us about your time here. You talk about, you're going to get your money's worth. I think you did.
I got several people's money's worth.
Tell us about that. How do you do that? How do you milk this experience for what it's worth?
Well, I came in not necessarily wanting to be, I'll just be honest, I am not a good law student. I'm a good lawyer. And that was what I wanted to be when I left this place. I wanted to be a lawyer, not really a student, degrees aside. And I thought this place was going to be where I could really engage with a lot of professors, a lot of alumni, and really learn about the practice of law. And the professionalism course was a good way to do that too, because our day we had to actually talk to and interview a practicing attorney.
They're going to do that too.
And we were reading, biographies. I think I joined the group that was doing Johnny Cochran. And we really got to experience what a lawyer is and what the practice of law is supposed to be, not just theory about the cases and let's have the Socratic method of question and answer, but really get into how are you going to take this lesson and practice one day. So that was really what I got out of this school, was the chance to really learn how to be a lawyer, not just a student.
It's interesting that your goal was to be a lawyer and not to worry so much about being a great law student. That's a very mature attitude for a law student. Where did that come from?
Again, I will say Dr. Lanier was a good representation of that, because having that law school experience in undergrad, when you realize you are not going to be the star. You know, you're coming here, all of you all were top performers in your undergrad degree, so what do you think is going to happen when you get here? There still has to be an average. Not everyone can be a top performer. Some people are going to be at the middle, some people are going to be at the bottom. And luckily he gave me that experience early on that you are not going to be the #1 student every single time, and that's okay. Did you graduate in the top 100%? Good.
After you left here is when you did the LLM stuff. Tell me about that decision. Why that as opposed to a different path?
Actually, getting here, my very first year, there was only one class I liked, and that was the property class with Professor Edwards when she was here. And she was very...
Out of all the classes you liked, one.
Out of all the classes, only one kept me here into the second semester, and that was property. Because I really like the future interest. I like talking about wills and trust and those transfers. And I just happened to ask her, well, property's the only class I like. What do I do with my life if that's the only thing I'm enjoying about the law? And she mentioned estate planning. And explained to me what that was, and I spend my life reading trust and dealing with those kind of conveyances. And I really enjoyed it. So I spent my whole time here taking all the courses I thought would help me get down the path to estate planning. But once I had done all of that, Professor Armstrong, the tax professor, let me know that estate planning nowadays is really tax specific. And if you're going to go down that field, you're going to need to know tax law, and you're going to have to know it very well to the point of getting an advanced degree, because most people were only hiring LLMs at that time. Because the transactions just become so complicated now, you have to have an advanced degree.
Yeah.
But she also told me if I was going to get an advanced degree, there were only 4 schools in the country that were worth having that degree from, and that was, of course, the top 4 on the list. Nobody even thinks about any of the others. Georgetown is number 2.
NYU, Florida, and what's the 4th?
Northwestern.
Okay.
And I did get into Northwestern first, so I thought, okay, well, I'm secure now. I've got the top 4. But then Georgetown came a-calling, and I mean, could I really let go of DC? An opportunity to really be in DC, where even though it's the number 2 school, that's where everything's really happening in the tax law. It's going to happen out of Washington, D.C. A lot of my professors were going on the Hill at the time when the estate tax was about to expire and trying to figure out what to do. So I figured, again, I want to be a good lawyer, not a student. So I need to be in the mix and really understand how this is all going to play out. So Georgetown was the place to go, and I loved every minute of it.
Now, how long have you been with the IRS?
July will be 7 years.
Okay. How did you get your job? One of the things that students are obviously concerned about is they're going to do all this, all this effort, all this money, all this grief.
Yeah.
And then at the end, one of the things they want is a job. And so, how did you get your job?
I'm going to say dumb luck again, because when I graduated, that was when the legal field completely tanked, and larger firms were dissolving. And here I was now leaving one of the best schools in the country with an advanced degree, which boxes you into, it really pigeonholes you. Once you get that specialization.
Let's get the timing right, because your LLM probably 2009?
Yes.
All right, so the crash is in the fall of 2008, and so by the time you graduate, the legal profession's really in the soup. All right,
so here I am trying to find a job when, there are people who've been practicing for 20 years who are now my competitor, not just people in my own graduating class. And there weren't any interviews being offered like they used to be. There weren't firms coming in. So I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I just decided to apply everywhere. Whether they were hiring or not, I sent every firm I could find that does what I do a letter. And for a long time, I had a stack of about 400 rejection letters from people who, we'd love to give you something, we have nothing, sucks to be you, goodbye. And I applied to a lot of jobs on USA Jobs for the government. That's where all the government hiring is done now on USA Jobs. And one night, from sun up to sundown, I went through everything that had an attorney to that job title and applied for every single one of them. And this job was there 3:15 a.m. I was tired, did not want to apply to anything else. This was the last job that showed up in the search, and I was ready to go to bed. But something told me if I don't apply for it now, I will not go back and do it because I'm just so exhausted. So I applied for it, and it happened to be estate and gift attorney, which was the only thing I had seen with a title that represented all, my degrees and what I wanted to do. So that's how I found the job. How I got the job was probably I begged and pleaded in that interview. And I'm not really saying that to be a joke. I really truly begged at the end because the people who were there in the room were all asking me about my experience. They kept asking, is your education the only thing that you have? Which it was at the time, because I had been in school. I hadn't practiced law, and the people who were in the waiting room to be interviewed were all people I knew had been practicing for at least 10 years. So everybody had years on me. And I really just had that moment of honesty and just said, if this is the only job that I have an interview for. If I don't get this job, I will not be a lawyer. This is all I want to do. This is all I'm going to do. But if you give me a job, I promise you I will outperform anybody you put in front of me. And luckily, the lady recommended me for the job. And funny enough, I found out in the background she had been calling my boss for years, checking up on me because she remembered me from that interview. And she was so excited that I was doing good at the job and doing better than everybody else. That's how I got all these promotions.
Yeah, maybe she wanted to make sure you weren't putting one over on.
Yeah, but I was dead serious that I wanted that job and I knew I could outdo anybody if I just had the opportunity. So I begged.
There's some wonderful lessons there. Maybe applying for that last one at 3:15.
Yeah.
I always tell students and my own children, you run through the tape, right? You don't stop short. I mean, you got to finish.
Yeah, get every last one of those applications again. Do not stop and just say, I'll get to it in the morning. Because you might be like me. If I really had went to bed that night, I wouldn't have gone back to it.
Well, I read your title. I don't really have a good picture of what you do all day. So tell us about that. Tell us about the job you have now. And then, you might talk a little bit about how you got there because you've been promoted repeatedly. But I'm really interested in what you do all day.
Well, in general, my job is built on two different jobs being combined, and I've had both of those other jobs too. So my original job when I was first hired was an estate and gift tax attorney. What that person does is, what people don't know, generally revenue agents do audits of your income tax returns, your business returns, but gift tax returns and estate tax returns and fiduciary income tax returns. So those are income that's produced by an estate or by a trust. All of those have to be audited by attorneys because the law in this area is so tiny, most of it is built on case law. So you have to have attorneys doing that, otherwise you've got an unauthorized practice of law. So we have a little bit of a niche and where we perform the audits on all of those returns. So I don't actually work with counsel. Well, my old job, I did not work with counsel. I represent the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, and counsel is my attorneys to go get me my money that I say this person owes. So that was my original job. Then eventually I moved into a leadership role in management, and that was the supervisory role that I'm currently sitting in temporarily, and that person is another attorney who supervises all the other attorneys to make sure administratively we have the workflow that we need. Cases are moving, that we're ordering what we need and really setting the tone of how the program is going to go. So those two have now combined to this job that I have, which is the lead position and litigation specialist. And it really occupies three jobs. It's an estate tax attorney, so I do perform audits, but I perform audits of our most complex work. The stuff that is going to show up in the newspapers, the things that are going to be setting precedent later on down the road, certain program initiatives of different transactions that we're now exploring that we didn't explore before. So I do a lot of the very complicated work and supervise team cases because sometimes it takes an army of us to handle one person's return because we're dealing with billionaires, we're dealing with the wealthiest of the wealthy, and they hold a lot of assets. It isn't cash, contrary to popular belief.
And they have their own army of lawyers.
And they have their army of lawyers. And every once in a while, it's not good to have 1 versus 20. It happens a lot, even in the regular position. I've been across from their own army of attorneys, and I have to hold my own, but when you get to a certain level, it's better to have 20 versus 20 to make that deal happen. But another component of my job is I prepare those cases for litigation. That's the litigation specialist part. Because I will also possibly be arguing that case in court. So I travel the line between counsel and the IRS. And I prepare them for litigation, but I might also be the one in the chair arguing for that case as well that I've prepared. So it's a good chance to really set the tone.
Well, tell me what you like about what you do. I mean, some people hear, well, I'm a tax attorney for the IRS. And their eyes begin to loll back in their heads. And, you obviously have a passion for what you do. What do you like about it?
It's two things. One, I like the fact that I am working for the government, so there is a public interest component of it. A lot of people do complain that the wealthy don't pay their fair share. What people don't realize is that my tax is the back end. After they've accumulated all this wealth and had so many preferential income tax treatment, they've hoarded their wealth and it hasn't spread out into the public. There is a tax on the back end for transferring it to the next generation. Right now, I think it's 35%. Used to be 45%. So there is that kind of catch-up tax in the back that is supposed to even everything out at the end of the day. So I do like the fact that I'm serving the public and I represent a tax that does provide the fair treatment. We've allowed you to have preferential treatment tax-wise up to a point. But just before you give away the farm and we never see it again, here we are. And this catches up for all those years we didn't give you the normal ordinary income tax. So I do like that component. But then I just really love the job. It's a very complicated world that I live in. In estate planning, you have to know everything. If anybody is interested in estate planning, I'm telling you now, you have to know a little bit about everything. At a moment's notice, I have to be a doctor, a forensic analysis, because I did have a case that involved murder. You have to be a forensic analysis, you have to be a medical technician, you have to be an insurance salesman, you have to be a business lawyer, intellectual property, we have to understand contract law, I have to be a valuation specialist of jewelry. I've had show horses, yachts, airplanes, and I have to do it. It's not other people in the room assisting me. I have to mentally go through this myself while the outside they've paid for their army to do all these things separately. So if you want to do this, you really have to learn a little bit about everything, but it doesn't get boring.
No, it doesn't sound like. So show horses?
Yes.
Valuation issues, I suppose, is it?
Yes. Horses, all horses, those purebred horses, especially horses that have won derbies, they have a value to them, and it's not what you pay for them usually, because they're income producing. Once they're in competitions, they are income producing. If you breed them, you don't breed them for free. So there is a value placed on them, and you have to get that right.
So variety is part of it.
Yes.
And just the intellectual challenge.
Yeah, constant intellectual challenge.
Right. I mean, if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Exactly.
All right. Interesting.
And then there's a little bit of an ego, and I think in my head that I work for the government. I'm a government lawyer, which is a little step above even, I'm a senior partner of this large law firm. I'm a government attorney. They defer to me.
Right.
So.
Well, and Professor Fleissner has often talked about that. He's going to be here Friday. But to walk in and say, I represent the people of the United States is something.
It is. And it's an honor to have. Don't take it lightly. There is an oath we all have to take. I definitely do not take that lightly. And I do make sure that everything I do supports the government's mission, and that when people see me as a government lawyer, they're proud to see someone representing the government. I've gotten a couple of thank you letters from representatives who said, I really appreciate that someone like you exists in the government, because it does change the image to have somebody who truly wants to be here and really holds value to being a government person.
As opposed to just marking time and...
Exactly. I'm just marking my time, catching my paycheck until some bigger firm snatches me up.
Well, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you that question. Could you ever imagine yourself leaving and going to a private firm? Being part of the Army on the other side?
I could, but here's the thing, and this is part of a lesson that I do want to convey to everybody. Happiness means more to me than the money. Money is not going to be everything. If you are in law just for the money, you will be miserable here. Because you will never be able to spend that money because you're working 2,000, trying to build 2,000 hours to make that money. And one thing I've done, because I do get a lot of offers to leave, I set up an Excel spreadsheet. And my business is about fair market value, valuation. I have an Excel spreadsheet where I've come up with the fair market value of my job.
Okay.
And it's not just the pay and the benefits, it's the fact that I only work 7 to 3:30, Monday through Friday. I do not work weekends. I do not work at 3:31. I'm out the door, do not call me, whatever it is, it's not important. As I jokingly tell a lot of my employees, the worst has already happened to our people. They died. Because the state tax. They died. There's nothing else that needs to be done. They can wait.
Justice dead in the morning.
Exactly. They can wait till tomorrow. I go on vacation. My phone doesn't ring. Sometimes I come to work in jeans. If I'm not seeing a taxpayer or I'm not out in the public, I can come in jeans. Nobody has a problem with that. I get to work from home if I need to. Sick leave, annual leave. I have all these intangibles available to me. I have an autonomy that you cannot find in the practitioner community. A lot of them, especially early on when you're young, you are hovered over. There's always somebody watching your every move. When I got here, they handed me a handful of cases and said, "Have at it, they're yours." And I've been responsible for my own work since day one. You don't get a lot of that. You don't get a lot of the mastery that I have here. In 1 year in the government, you can probably outshine people who've been in practice for 10 years because you can't beat the level of experience they're going to throw at you because they can't divide up the work. They have to just throw it out there.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say it that way because Friday, Dean Floyd made a presentation to this class about some research that was done about what makes lawyers happy and satisfied in their work. Autonomy was basically number one.
Yeah. Anytime you have a technical job, mastery and autonomy are the real motivators, not money usually. And that's what you're going to have to learn here now. Before you get out there, do not think it's just going to be about money. So I have my Excel spreadsheet, and I've had it ranked. How much money would it take in that category to move me out of giving that up? If my next job had none of this, what would it take? And then I have it divided up amongst a rating system for each category. So then I plug it in, and it gives me the value of my current job. And then I take that same information and plug it in for the job they offer me, ask a lot of questions, and at the bottom of the line, I see what is the value. And while they offer me a lot more money, they still can't match what I have in value at the job that I currently have.
But now we're just negotiating. I mean, they just haven't offered you enough.
Yeah, and I let them know in advance. I have this spreadsheet. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. If you don't meet my spreadsheet, I'm out.
And nobody has said that.
Nobody has made it happen yet. They try, but they're just not there yet.
All right. Let me do the flip side here. Is there anything you find frustrating about your job, or what's maybe the most challenging thing you found to be in your job?
Perception. Perception is probably the worst thing and recently on Lawyers Day, I sent an email to all my employees because we really occupy 3 jobs. Each of my employees occupies 3 different jobs that are hated or looked upon in a bad sense. Lawyers. Generally, people have their impressions and a lot of it is negative. Then we're government employees, another negative. And then we're IRS employees. And for people who don't know, an IRS employee, when I first got hired, they let me know if you're an IRS employee, the level of threats to your life is second only to the president. So the vice president doesn't even get threatened as much as I do.
So how does those negative perceptions play out in your daily life? What do you encounter that makes it difficult?
Well, you get protests in front of the building, so there's always a security risk just walking into the building. There's always bomb threats. There's always people outside who are there either to harass you or harm you. So you're always on on deck. And for a little while, there was a little bit of, I think it was either Al-Qaeda or one of those particular groups were targeting IRS employees specifically and trying to find out where our locations were and our identities to find us. Why, I still don't know, but we all got these mass emails about making sure if we use social media, don't check in the building. And don't let your identity as an IRS employee be seen, because wherever you're checking in, somebody may be there to target you, and now they know where you are.
Well, I had no idea.
People get very ticked off about taxes, as I've learned, and that I think is the most frustrating part of my job, is that the perception of all of us as these bad guys for various different reasons, when these are just everyday, ordinary people who are trying to do a job. They're trying to do a job for the government. Tax law exists. We didn't make it. Our job is to execute the laws and enforce compliance. And we're not taking more than what's entitled. My job, it specifically states in my job description, to collect the substantially correct amount of tax. It doesn't say gouge them. I don't have authority to gouge anybody and take things that we're not entitled to. But there is a tax law system. It has to be enforced. I just happen to be one of those people who enforces it.
Well, it wouldn't be consistent with your role to try to get as much as possible. You're supposed to get the right amount.
I'm supposed to get the right amount. I've issued refunds for millions of dollars because they were entitled to that refund. Legitimately, it was not the government's money. I had to give it back. But people do harass you. Even practitioners that I'm with, they see us as this bad guy, this ominous presence who's always there to do harm. Not, we're here to just collect the substantially correct amount. We're here to do what's right.
Let me ask you another question about the, and then what you're going back to the beginning of your career. Was there anything that surprised you about that transition from student, lawyer?
Sadly, I'm going to say it's the level of incompetence that happens in the practitioner community. I don't know when it happens, but I think a lot of people they either weren't trained properly, they spent their lives being students and not lawyers, because I do have a lot of people who 20 years later will still argue theory. Well, if the transaction were this way, I'd be right. Unfortunately, this person has died. The transaction is as it stands, and we need to talk about reality. You messed up. But also, I think there's a laziness that happens at a certain point, too, that I didn't realize. When I was here, everything could make you lose your license. Don't move that comma, you could lose your license. That's how headaches you guys are about everything. And when I got out, it just seemed like nobody cared. The level I looked at their work, I'm just thinking to myself,
You care.
I care, but looking at what they're presenting as their work that they're attaching their license and their name to was garbage. I was like, I wouldn't even spit in this.
And it's a very common reaction of students having in externships and so on, that see the level of incompetence that is out there. It's shocking, it's disappointing. Although students find some comfort in it because they think, well, I'm already better than they are.
That's true, especially with the legal writing program we have here. I will honestly tell you, the worst of you is still better than the average that is out there.
Yeah, and I remember being surprised by the same thing. Well, the IRS is obviously a big organization. Some law firms are big. In work environments that these students will go into when they graduate, some will be in a large organization. As the new person coming in with no experience, having begged and pleaded your way into this job, you had to find a way to succeed, to distinguish yourself, and obviously you've done that. As a young lawyer, how do you succeed in such an organization?
You really have to go in as if tomorrow is your last day on the job. And what I mean by that is you cannot be afraid to speak up. You can't say, well, I'm the new guy, nobody's going to listen to me, or I'm the new guy, what do I know? They're going to be telling you that. But if you genuinely have an idea, if there's genuine things that you want to do, you have to speak up for yourself. And that was one of the things that I did at the very beginning. and initially, they give you your cases, you don't really have a say in it, or at least you think you don't have a say. The very first thing I did was walk into my boss's office and tell her to never give me the following cases that she had given me. I was like, I know I can do more. I know I'm better than this. I actually said, I was like, this is beneath me because this is too easy. I know I can do more and I want to do more. And so she just talked to me and she said, okay, well, tell me something about your background and what would you like? And I was like, as long as it's not this, I want some of everything. Whatever you've got in the drawer, every schedule on the return, I want to be an expert in everything about this return. So I kind of took control of what I wanted out of the program. And I wasn't afraid to speak up and say, I think we should do this because this might be better. Or I would submit proposals of program initiatives that we should do, that we're starting to do now, but it got me on the radar of higher up people because as I met them and told them my name, they said, I got a memo from you about XX initiative, and we would start engaging in conversations. And I wasn't afraid to really speak up and do the things that I thought was best for not only the government, but for me and my career as well. So, but that's really because it didn't matter because they really could fire you in your first year as probationary year. They can fire you for anything. So I really walked in like, if this is my last day, I'm gonna make an impact. I'm gonna get the most out of every single day. And if you go in doing that, you really can take charge early of your career and be heard by higher up people, and you can move a lot faster, as I've learned. You can move up a lot quicker than what's usually expected in the government.
It's fascinating to hear you describe it that way because, Doc Schneider from King and Spalding has sat in that chair numerous times and said almost exactly the same thing about being a King and Spalding, right? That you take ownership from the beginning. You are not just a cog in some big machine. But I've never heard it quite said that way. I like that. Treat it as if it's your last day.
Mm-hmm.
That is really something. You talked before about being the government lawyer, what that means to you, and how sometimes people will treat you differently because of that. Have you encountered difficulties in your professional life because of your race?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that.
And I will say, the business that I work in, estate planning, wealthy people, there is only really one person who is built to work in this profession and has worked in this profession since the beginning of time, and that's an old white man.
Okay.
Youth in general
is 1 out of 3.
Youth in general is a problem in this area because they automatically assume there's no way you can handle, these billionaires or these very wealthy people. What do you know? You just got out of school, fresh-faced. So already youth is a hindrance. But you don't find many women that work in this. You definitely don't find minorities. I've never sat across from me at any of these meetings. I've never heard of me across in these meetings. And I work with people who've been in this job for 20 or 30 years. And they can tell you too, they have never seen anybody like me, not with my degrees, not just my face, young black man, they've never seen it before. And while you think, oh, that's good, you're the novelty, no, that's bad. Because I look nothing like what people want to see in this business. And you can see their faces. Because Bryan Babcock does not convey that this is what you're going to find when I meet you face to face. So when we talk, and my middle name is Oliver, so there's nothing. there's absolutely nothing that would give away that you're going to meet a black man when you see me. So on the phone, everything is cordial. Yes, Mr. Babcock. Oh, you're really, a couple of people who've been there practicing for 20, 30 years, they're like, you must have been the person who was hired when I applied for the job. So you took my job. They think I'm much, much older. I show up to the meeting, all of a sudden, it's not as cordial. All of a sudden, you just see their face going, that isn't Bryan Babcock. So then they start asking questions, well, when did you graduate from school? How did you get this job? What kind of degrees do you have? What's your experience? They really start grilling you as if it's for a job interview. I'm like, you're the one whose client owes money, and I'm being grilled. But you can see in their face they don't expect it. They really didn't want to see it in some cases. And I find it when I apply for jobs on the outside too. Some people are okay with it, But there are some people where, let's just say the job was definitely mine, and all I had to do was show up face to face just so they could, put a face to the name. And we've had 7, 8, 9 interviews, so I've gone all the way up the chain. The job is essentially mine. And then when I show up and they see my face, the very next thing that comes out of their mouth after I've left, after the shock has worn off, is, well, he works for the government, we're not sure he can transition. But they asked me that in 9 different interviews, and we're comfortable with that answer. But the very final thing is, well, we didn't hire him because he's government, and it may be a hard transition for him. We all know what it was.
Yeah.
I saw it in their face.
Yeah. Tell me about that moment when you walk into the meeting and you see the look on their face of surprise. And that's offensive. How do you deal with it? How do you handle it in the moment?
Well, fortunately, I grew up in Selma, Alabama. Anybody who knows their history knows what it means to live in a place like that. Unfortunately, the movement did not make its way back. After it left Selma, it did not necessarily come back. So, there was times when I was a kid, I was just a kid. I'll say this now too. I went to school very early in the morning. I got up at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and the elementary school I went to, this is elementary school, was on the white side of town. And I would creep into that side of town in the middle of the night, basically under cover of darkness, and wouldn't take main streets because I was afraid something would happen to me because there were very few of us in the school. And I would go there very early, sneak in through the gate, it was locked, and I would hide behind a corner until the janitor showed up and started unlocking the building, because I was afraid something would happen to me. And then when school was over, I took the back way to get back to my side of town where I felt, safer. So I think I'm used to it. I hate to say it that way, but I have been more desensitized to it. I already see it coming. I'm prepared for it. So when I walk in the room and I see the surprise, I know what it's about, but I'm already ready to go. I've got my game face on. I know I'm good at this job, and I know I'm going to outshine them in that moment, and I'm going to leave them devastated and go about my business.
Whether they have that reaction or not, the end result is the same.
Yeah, because I still have a job to do at the end of the day, and I still owe that to the U.S. taxpayers to not be frazzled, to not be emotional in that moment, because I still have a job to do.
So essentially, you're conditioned to ignore it.
I won't say
not to
ignore
react,
it,
not to
but
react.
not to react to it, not to let it get me down, not to let it throw me off my game,
Right.
because a job still has to be done. And it's also a lesson as an attorney, period. Things happen in your life. You cannot leave personal at home every single time. We're not robots. Unfortunately, I love to hire an army of robots, but I got to deal with human beings. So, and with that comes emotions, it comes experience, it comes path. There's a past that you all have when you walk in the door, but you owe something to someone else in that room. Whether it's your client, whether it's the justice system, you owe something to somebody else, and you've got to still be that calm person in the room that gets the job done. I've had a long lifetime experience of keeping my personal life out of getting what I need to in the end. So I had a little bit of a 20, 25 year
Right.
head start in the process, but it's the same thing you're going to learn as a lawyer, is that you've got to leave some of that personal stuff at the door to get the job done.
Well, one of the things I always do with the people who are kind enough to spend time with us is, before I turn it over to the students, I turn it over to you, generally. And I'm going to invite you to say basically anything you want to say to the students. I mean, they have to be here. So you have a captive audience. And you've been quite literally where they're sitting, and not that long ago, really. Is there anything that you think they ought to hear from you? Anything maybe that you wish you had heard as a first-year law student? Any advice? Just anything you want them to hear that I haven't asked you about?
Yes. The one thing I wish would have been said, even though I realized it, luckily, when I came in, And that's how a lot of students remember me, and I'll tell you the story behind it. But the one thing you all should know that isn't really expressed in the legal field in general is that you do get to be yourself here. There is an image of a lawyer, and nobody has to emulate it. I know we all seem like we're going to be these stuffy, tie-wearing, lawyers, having drinks at the country club. There's this just image of lawyers. You don't have to be that. I'm a character. I can't help myself. I don't like to wear ties. That is a part of me. I don't like to wear ties. I have saddle shoes at home that I wear in all kinds of crazy colors. I actually have a pair of yellow wingtips, and I will wear them to work. But that's because that's my personality. I'm a fun person, and you still get to be that person and be a successful lawyer. And I think so many people have this image of a lawyer that they're going to change part of themselves. Something about you got you here. Why let that go once you have the achievement? You still got to be you at the end of the day, otherwise you're still not going to be happy. Even if you find a job you like, if you're not being you, you're not going to appreciate it as much, because you have to know that Bryan got this job. Bryan is the one making this, not Babcock Esquire. And I wish that was emphasized more in the legal field, that you've got to be you at the end of the day, and that you get to be you. Who you are, that unique person you are, has a benefit in the entire profession. So don't let it go.
It's interesting that we used to talk about that as the imposter syndrome, right? That I feel like I've got to be somebody, in order to do this job. Well, I've got a long list of questions, so I'm going to shut up for a minute and let me turn it to the students and see what questions you have for Bryan. Don't be bashful. Yes, ma'am, way in the back.
Hey, Evelyn. One of my questions was, you said that you really liked the estate plan or the property course, and you realized that was something you were interested in. I know a lot of people say that classes don't necessarily correlate to what you want to do in practice. How did you find an interest just in the material, or was it like a professor that was more of an inspiration, or what was it for you?
It was probably the professor. Because if you all didn't have the experience of Professor Edwards, but she was one of those people who was very analytical. She was very detail-oriented. We would only talk about one case for the entire class, and she would pick everything out, footnotes, historical context. She also believed in narrative analysis, so she really had to look at the person. So what she was doing was basically what I do every day, is I have to think about the person, not just the conveyance. Why was it structured that way? Why did these facts indicate this particular analysis? So it was her way of doing it that made the topic something that I could truly grasp. And she loved future interest. She literally wrote our book on future interest. So in her dragging that out further than other property teachers would, I really got the chance to see how her type of analysis plays into structuring estate planning. Because a lot of what I do now is extracting the same conversation out of the cases, out of the return that I had in her class. So it is true. What you're going to learn in these classes is not necessarily reflective of what's going to go on the outside, but every once in a while you get a teacher who teaches it in a way that is going to be beneficial to how you practice, especially here, where a big emphasis is on being a lawyer. Take advantage of that. Pay attention to what's going on. Stay off your phones. Stay off Facebook in the middle of class. Pay attention to what's going on. And if something calls to you, talk to that teacher afterwards. Get to know them. Find out what it is that made them passionate about it.
Right, yes.
So, as you mentioned, you are a lawyer, a government employee, and an IRS employee. Do you find that that negatively impacts any of your personal relationships, or how it works when you meet new people, especially outside of the legal field? Do they automatically kind of have a negative idea of you, or are they able to get past it?
I have had a few people get in my face at parties about it. And generally I find, again, it's that misperception of what we do. And I'm one of those people, I will talk to anybody, so even when they're in my face, I'll start asking them, what do you think? What do you think about the IRS? What do you think my job is? And most of the time they think that, we're basically they actually think that I'm Congress. That I can just make these laws out of thin air anytime I want. And so then I understand, okay, I need to take this opportunity as an education moment. And these are lawyers too, who think that I represent, that I'm a congressman, that I'm just magically making laws. And I have to educate them, no, I work for the executive branch. This agency, what we do is collect the tax. We administer the laws, but I didn't get to create them. If I got to create them, it'd be a whole different, it'd be a brand new kind of law if I could create it myself. So, even though there is that misperception, and I do get it from people who are friends, people I meet at parties, I take that moment to talk about it and educate them. And a lot of times, someone in the room has had a really good experience with the agency, and they finally get to share with somebody, you know what, this person did something very good for me. I appreciate the IRS and what they do. I actually met 2 ladies in Washington, D.C. They actually took me out for drinks during the night and were telling me, I love what you do, and I'm so proud to have met you, and good for you, and we should pay taxes and all these things. And she was so proud that she was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax because she said, that's my fair share.
That doesn't happen every day, though, does it?
No, but I had to remember it because you can't be afraid of that perception. You can't be afraid to engage in the conversation because you just never know what's going to come out of it. Two different ones here.
Yes, ma'am. No, sir. There actually was a young lady in the back who had her hand up back here.
You had your hand up.
First of all, thanks for talking to us. My question is, you were talking about applying for USA Jobs. I actually did this just yesterday with the Environmental Protection Agency. Did you do anything to sort of like follow up, or did you have like a contact on the inside? My best friend works there, but not in the legal department, so I was sort of curious, how do I follow up after I submit the application?
Honestly, there isn't a follow-up. There is, if you have any particular inquiries, in the job application they had, I think it was usually HCO, Human Capital Office. Is that the address they probably had in there?
I honestly didn't look that close into it.
Human Capital Office is probably the only person who's going to answer any questions, and they're really only going to give you a status update. In general, the way the government works, it's hurry up and wait. So you're pretty much going to wait for a while. Just to give you kind of a story of everybody that I know, our experience of getting jobs there, we applied and never heard anything for maybe 6 months sometimes, and then all of a sudden you get a phone call that says, oh, we're going to interview for you such job, and they'll schedule it within like a week. You still won't hear from them for maybe a couple of more months, and then they say, oh, you got the job, can you be here in 2 weeks? And the particular time I was hired, there were about 5 people who lived on the West Coast in California and Hawaii who had 2 weeks to pack up their life and get all the way to Fort Lauderdale, Florida to start their job. That's just how it works. There's a long gap of silence, and then everything just happens.
Do you think that works the same for internships? Because, it got to start pretty much once the summer commences, so you kind of have to get everything in order, I guess, earlier. Do you still think it would take the same amount of time? It probably
won't take the same amount of time, but there is going to be a lag where you don't hear anything. Like I said, the only thing you can probably do is just get a status update. In USA Jobs, there is a place where you can go for your application status. I've noticed that because all the government has moved to USA Jobs as their official postings, a lot of things have automated a lot quicker, and you get notification a lot faster of what's going on. It's still going to be a lag, but you will get notified timely that they're reviewing it, or they've submitted it for the next level, or that you've been made best qualified or qualified as a candidate. But you just got to be a little bit patient. There was somebody ready.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in being a tax attorney, so it's like a 2-part question. Where do you see the legal profession going in the next 5 years, and then specifically, where do you see the tax profession going?
That's an interesting question as far as legal field in general. I personally think the legal field is going to be a little bit more difficult for practitioners, and that's more just a business standpoint, because nowadays there are so many people leaving, law school, becoming new lawyers. We already have other lawyers, and there's just this constant influx in the legal field. So I think the value that we present is going to be different. The larger the city is, the harder it's going to be for you. And what I've noticed is everybody wants to go to the big city. Everybody wants to be the New York lawyer, the Atlanta lawyer, the LA lawyer, the Fort Lauderdale, Miami lawyer. They want to be the big time, the big fish in the big pond. But what's getting left behind are all the rural areas. The small towns, they have to drive 50 miles to their nearest attorney. Those are the places where I think the legal field is going to create a niche for the person who's willing. If you're willing to invest in that community, that's where your job is probably going to be, not the big cities, because everybody's is in the big cities. And that's just my take on the legal field. It's just as a whole. I think we're overflooded right now, and we can't charge the same. And if you can't charge the same, you can't live the same as you can in those big cities. So you've got to find a place where the cost of living is better and you can provide a service that's ongoing. If you're the only attorney in the whole county, you've got a business.
What about the tax practice in particular?
The tax practice, what I've seen now, and even in my field, even though I do estate and gift, what I'm noticing now is income tax specifically, basis, is now more important than anything. Everything is geared toward basis, and y'all may not know what that means yet, because if you take the income tax class, basically when you sell something, the cost you put into it versus what you realize for it, the basis is everything that you put into it. So maybe the purchase price, maybe the improvements you put in, all of that is built in your basis so that when you sell it, if you sell it for the exact amount you put in it, there's no gain that's taxed. But if there is a big difference, you only put $10,000 in and you sold it for $200,000, there's $190 gain that needs to be taxed. So that has come into a lot of planning. That's how people now strategize their businesses. That's how they strategize their estate planning. That's how they strategize their trust about how can we do basis. And Congress just passed a regulation for basis consistency. So now, whatever you report on one end, you've got to follow it all the way through, because we will now be tracking it to make sure you don't think that we don't see. You told us here your basis was 0 because it didn't affect you. But over here you said, oh, my basis is $200,000. No, the basis was $200,000 all the way through, or it was 0, depending on which one you filed first.
Bryan, we're out of time. I'm going to invite the students again to come up and meet you individually. For the moment, all I can do is join them in thanking you for a wonderful morning.